Well, as tariffs remain an important talking point in and around the U.S. economy right now, we are seeing the price impact in stores, even really before the impacts hit companies. I have noticed myself at my local grocery store the prices on things like orange juice and milk going up recently. And we've seen gas prices go up even before the latest conflict in the Middle East took place. So the question is, will companies raise prices faster than the tariffs themselves? It brings up some unique components of what is called dynamic pricing. And a pleasure to be joined by John Zhang, who is Assistant Professor of Business Economics and Public Policy here at the Wharton School. Hi, John. Great to talk to you again.
Yeah, good to be with you, Dan.
Thank you. This element of dynamic pricing that you have talked about, it becomes important to discuss in this scope of how companies kind of react to some of the things that are going on in the economy right now.
There are two separate things I think that you mentioned. Number one, when tariffs goes up, as a, let's suppose, retailer, do you want to raise your prices? And I think what you observe is definitely and right on the money, and which is that a lot of companies do take advantage of what's going on with the tariffs and to raise their prices. The reason is because when tariffs goes up, for instance, and you can imagine that as consumers, we tend to be more tolerant of the price increases, right? We tend to be more receptive and to price increases simply because we know the firms are struggling, their costs have increased, and therefore that we probably cut them some slacks. And firms actually know that, right? And also that the other reason why as a firm you don't want to raise price normally aggressively is simply because the competition may stay put and they probably not going to increase their price. But in this kind of a situation, you can imagine that tariff and will increase the cost for just about everybody. So when you raise your price, you're not so worried that the competition is not going to raise their price. So because of that, you can see that as a firms, you probably have a more incentive in this environment to raise prices. But the second issue you mentioned is really about dynamic pricing. And firms always want to, if they could, if they don't upset their customers, and they want to do dynamic pricing. And many people begin to think that this tariff and really could create an environment where if you have always been thinking about doing dynamic pricing, this might be your chance to initiate it.
And dynamic pricing is something that we have had in and around us for a long time. It is a challenge, just as you mentioned, that if you're going to use it, you don't want to upset your customers in the process of using it.
Absolutely. I think that dynamic pricing is something that firms will never forget about. And the reason is because there are lots of people out there, and for exactly the same product, they're willing to pay different prices. You can imagine as a firm, you always have an incentive to charge those people who are willing to pay a high price or high price. And those people who are not willing to pay a high price or low price, right? In order for you to do that, of course, there are so many different ways to do it. Dynamic pricing is one way to implement that. And you just want to make sure that when consumers are price insensitive at a certain time, you charge a higher price. And when consumers are price sensitive at some times, and you will charge a low price. And definitely as a firm, you want to implement dynamic pricing in some way. But of course, there is always a good way to do it and also a bad way to do it. I think what we tend to observe in the marketplace is that a lot of firms have not thought through and what's the impact of dynamic pricing on consumers, how the consumers may react to it, how you should frame your pricing practice in such a way that consumers are receptive to what you're doing.
So the companies see it as an opportunity to pad their bottom line a little bit?
Well, they always want to do that, and this is definitely a good opportunity to use the dynamic pricing and to do it. And but of course, you notice that many firms messed it up, and like the Wendy's at one point was talking about dynamic pricing, talk about the surge pricing, and for the launch menu, right? And when you do something like that, of course, the customers, you can imagine they will be really upset simply because at the noon, there are more people buying your hamburgers, and I'm hungry at that point in time. And all of a sudden you say, well, I'm going to charge you, let's say 10% or 20% more, right? And but there is actually a better way to do it. What you should do is that dynamic pricing doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have to raise the price.
Right.
You could have started with a high price and offer dynamic discounts.
Right.
Okay, dynamic discounting probably would be a more palatable way to implement dynamic pricing.
Similar to when we go out at happy hour and there's always a discount on appetizers or drinks, whatever it is, because the company really understands that they want to have as many people in their door as possible. It's better to have full seats than it is to have empty seats.
Right. Remember that they can offer the happy hour discount pricing simply because the menu price is very high in the first place. Right. So you can imagine that in this particular case that you could easily keep your menu price very high and offer dynamic discounting.
But is the expectation of the consumer when they see prices go up, and let's just say that it is dynamic pricing, that the consumer expects that price to come back at some point as well?
Well, when you do dynamic pricing, that definitely should be, and that definitely should be something that happens, right? So if you keep just raising your price over time, never bring the price down, of course, that's not a dynamic. And also that destroy the whole purpose of doing dynamic pricing. And you do dynamic pricing simply because you want to make sure that at the times when consumers are price insensitive and you charge a high price, and when consumers are price sensitive and you want to charge a low price. When consumers become more price sensitive, for instance, during happy hours, simply because you got a lot of choices. You don't have to go to a particular bar, right? So in that case, the happy hour would definitely generate a lot more sales. And so that's why you want to draw them in. And of course, once they get in, and they're going to buy a lot of other things where you're going to make money.
So then the best way for the consumer to somewhat hold a company accountable if they are using a version of dynamic pricing is either using their competition or using, if they're going to the grocery store, using not a name brand product to be able to save a little money in that manner.
Well, consumers can always discipline firms by voting by their feet. Right? You can just walk away and go somewhere else and to buy the drinks or the food, like in Wendy's case. And if Wendy's go ahead and implement the price surge at lunchtime, you can imagine that the lunch crowd is not going to show up at Wendy's, and they're going to go somewhere else. And also, in most cases, that firms are disciplined and by the competition. So if you charge too high a price, the competition doesn't, and obviously that they're going to lose your customers and lose your market share.
How prevalent is dynamic pricing, do you think, right now? And potentially, how long, is this something that consumers should get used to dealing with as we move forward here?
Well, it used to be the case that it's pretty rare, right? If you look at the history, I would say that dynamic pricing is becoming more and more popular today. And first started with the airline industry after deregulation. Of course, that they change the prices all the time. And then of course, you notice that nowadays for hotel rentals is dynamic pricing, and for the car rentals is dynamic pricing. You talk about theater tickets, they are dynamic pricing. Baseball tickets, in many cases, they are also dynamic pricing, and so on and so forth. There are more and more industries that are looking into this, and they definitely have a economic incentive to embrace this particular practice. It just would just take some time for them to figure it out. By the way, as customers, and you probably don't want to hate the dynamic pricing in general. The reason is because if a price goes up and down like this, right, you can imagine that if you really care about the prices, if you are really price sensitive, and you have a chance to pay low prices, you can become more vigilant and to take advantage of low prices. For instance, if you really care about the pricing for the drinks, of course, you always just show up at the happy hour, right? Imagine that if you take that away, and then, of course, you don't show up at all.
Yeah. Hey, John, great to talk with you and get your insight. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dan.
You got it. John Zhang, who is Assistant Professor of Business Economics and Public Policy here at the Wharton School.